Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back, new fanfic. Wooka's What If Naruto Was Raised and Protected by Tsunade, Part 1. Don't forget like, subscribe and share. Now let's start story. Hey Jiraiya sensei. What's a good gift for Auntie Tsunade? A young male's voice interrupted the peaceful atmosphere that had settled long ago in the area. The older male turned his head to glance at his student, slightly surprised to hear the boy show interest in something that wasn't shinobi related. Why are you asking, Naruto? It was indeed something to take note of, considering the boy wasn't exactly normal. The teen preferred to remain in isolation and loved silence. He wasn't much of a talker and generally only participated in social activities if it was, in his words, logical. The blonde possessed similar idealisms to that of the Aburame in Konoha. Considering his upbringing, it wasn't all that surprising. He was emotionally stunted due to the treatment by the populace in Konoha. Hiruzen had tried all he could, but he was only one man. Kami rest his soul. The young teen glanced towards his teacher with a blank face before tilting his head slightly. Is it not the appropriate gesture when you wish to show gratitude on one's birthday? After all, it is what you would do for me. It was slightly unnerving being under the stare of the boy. But the older male had grown used to it over the years. Well, yes. But I was more interested in why you wished to give her a gift. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders lightly after his statement. His student turned away from him and stared out into the empty field with that same emotionless gaze. Is it not logical of me to give her a gift? She is the only person aside from yourself to show genuine care for me. The older male sighed at the 16-year-old's statement. It was true for the most part. Jiraiya would visit Naruto on his birthday every year to make sure he had the essentials. The boy didn't have friends because he preferred to be alone. When the boy was 10 or so, Jiraiya suspected that he was a little on the spectrum. His teammate only being able to confirm this in private. Tsunade had showed genuine kindness and a far more gentler side to the young boy when she had met him. Though she had left Konoha of her own volition, she was still loyal through and through. The older woman discovering she had an actual living family member was what truly enticed her return to take the mantle of the fifth Hokage. Tsunade finding out about Naruto's condition and his treatment had struck a fire in her that he hadn't seen since Dan's death. Jiraiya had feared for even his own safety following the woman's wrath. She could be quite vengeful when she needed to be. Jiraiya shook his head slightly and responded to his student's question. Well, maybe some sake. The older male had a small grin at that. Auntie Tsunade drinks too much to begin with. It is unhealthy. She has the ability to cleanse and purge the after effects of consuming such large quantities, but it doesn't mean it's logical to do so. The boy's face remained blank, but the older male could see the glimpse of annoyance in his student's eyes. Why do you care so much, him? A little crush perhaps? A sly grin morphed on his face. The boy's face turned towards the man with a raised eyebrow. She would be far more interested in a younger man than one who has vacated his prime. The statement was so blunt that Jiraiya could feel it smack him in his face. Literally. Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched following his student's statement. Oi, ya little shit. I'm only 45 years old. If you haven't noticed, Tsunade is the same age as me. The young man gave a light shrug and retorted. Yes, but she is still in her prime and will remain that way until her early 60s. Auntie Tsunade is Uzumaki and Senju born. The boy then leaned against the tree he sat in front of and closed his eyes, continuing on. She may be 45, but the combined genetics of those two clans puts her at mid-20s. You and I both know very well that her excuse of using a genjutsu to hide her age is just that. An excuse. It is impossible to have such finite control of one's chakra to pull off such a feat 24/7. The Toad Sage was annoyed that every single word that was being said was entirely true. Why does the brat feel the need to attack his age? Also, I did not mean to offend you. I was merely stating facts. Yes. Well, most people do not wish to hear such things. The boy furrowed his eyebrows with genuine confusion. Why is that? Why would anyone wish to hear the opposite of the truth? The older male just sighed as he remembered just who in fact he was talking to. A prodigy of all things shinobi related but completely oblivious to all things, normally human, related. A conundrum if he ever saw one. Because Naruto, some things that are truthful can actually be detrimental. Jiraiya began to scribble in his notepad as he knew that Naruto would begin asking questions. The truth being a detriment. How is that logical? Jiraiya sat silent for several seconds wondering how he should approach the subject. His young student was eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The only emotions the boy seemed to ever really show. Got it, he snapped his fingers. Say you wish to give Tsunade a compliment. How would you do so? The man stared at his student with a smile. Naruto blinked before responding. I would tell her that she is both powerful and beautiful. His sensei nodded before continuing on. Now, what are things that you dislike about Tsunade and how would you tell her? The older male immediately held his hands up in defense at Naruto's piercing stare. No jokes this time. I'm being serious. The young male nodded slightly before narrowing his eyes. I would tell her that her frequent use of alcohol is slightly barbaric. Jiraiya snapped his finger following the boy's answer. That is something you would not verbally tell Tsunade. He could tell that he was getting through to the boy now. But, why not? Alcohol is a detriment to her health. The blonde had his head tilted slightly with a vexed expression on his face. Because Tsunade knows her limits. Alcohol is a detriment to anyone besides Jinchurikis and that woman. Her body actually purges the toxins in the alcohol faster than they can affect her. Tsunade just chooses to block it. He gave a slight shrug afterwards. I don't understand. Jiraiya gave a small smile at that and responded. It's due to the fact that Tsunade enjoys the feeling of it. Alcohol will never truly harm the woman. It's physically impossible. I assume she dramatizes her drunkenness to get you and Shizune annoyed. Naruto adopted a frown for a slight moment before shrugging. If it makes her happy, I will continue to indulge in her little game. A shrug following suit. A comfortable silence sat in the clearing after the boy's statement. Jiraiya glanced at his student for a small moment. Despite his earlier tease, the boy might actually have an infatuation with the woman. It would make sense. Naruto may not understand basic human emotions, but he indeed had them. It wouldn't be a stretch to believe he had a crush on the woman. It's not like there were any other women that the Jinchuriki would frequently speak with. Kakashi had informed him of the dynamics of Team 7, which weren't that great to begin with. A young man with a heart full of vengeance, a young woman that didn't understand the true intricacies of being a kunoichi, and another young man who lacked basic human sympathy and empathy. A cluster was the first thing to come to mind. Jiraiya and Naruto were on this 3-year trip due to the event of his teammates' choices regarding the village. Sasuke Uchiha had abandoned Konoha in favor of power. Tsunade had delegated Shikamaru Nara, Neji Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka, Choji Akimichu, Rock Lee, and Naruto Uzumaki to track the boy down and bring the Uchiha back alive. The mission was a success but a catastrophe of epic proportions. 3 young men ended up in critical condition and the target Sasuke Uchiha was killed by Naruto. Jiraiya had no idea what actually happened. Every time he asked the boy, he would get ignored or the subject would change. The only individual who knew the information was Tsunade herself. The 5th Hokage refused to speak about it. While a tracking team was sent to retrieve the young boys after their fights, Naruto arrived at the gates later that day with a dead Sasuke over his shoulders. He had simply stated that, I failed the mission parameters. The last, loyal, Uchiha was dead and by the hands of the village's own Jinchuriki no less. Every shinobi was of similar mind regarding the situation. Sasuke had betrayed the leaf and he was disposed of. It was unfortunate, but that was just shinobi life. The young Jinchuriki did not seem bothered by any of it. He had took everything in stride. The young male had been berated by his female teammate before brushing past her to see if his squad was alive. Kiba, Neji, and Choji would recover and eventually find out what happened following their fights. They weren't that surprised at the outcome of Naruto and Sasuke's battle. The entire team comprised of Genins and one Chunin knew just how strong Naruto could be. The Uchiha liked to pride himself on his combat abilities, but when Naruto decided to take his gloves off, the fight would generally end. Jiraiya had sprung the boy with him due to the fact that Itachi would catch wind of this. The boogeyman of the Uchiha was a man you didn't typically cross. Regardless of what Jiraiya knew of the young prodigy, he knew for certain that Itachi would be displeased. Whether that be in Konoha or Naruto was up for debate. After all, with Danzo's death occurring, many secrets had leaked out. None of them were good either. Jiraiya was glad that Tsunade had ended that sick life. When she activated her seal, that fight was over regardless of how many Sharingans that monster possessed. The gall of the man to push for the Uchiha's annihilation as well as using Itachi Uchiha to commit such a heinous act. The Reaper would no doubt wish to speak with the source of his little brother's subsequent death. It was a big reason why the Toad Sage had convinced Tsunade to let him take the boy. Even if the situation was explained about Danzo's treachery, Jiraiya was uncertain about Itachi's course of action. It was better to be safe than sorry. The Akatsuki was another problem. A group of S-rank rogue shinobi united under a single banner. For what reason? The war veteran was uncertain. But it most likely had to deal with Jinchurikis. Anything regarding the Bijus was dangerous. If that group was actively targeting the hosts for the Bijus, then it was nothing but trouble. This trip would be over in a couple of months anyway. Tsunade was getting antsy. Her monthly messages that she would send regarding the progress and Naruto himself were beginning to double. He assumed they would triple when they got nearer to the date that they would return. The older man shook his head slightly before making his way to his feet. Come on, kid. We gotta make it to Kumo before sundown. The young man just nodded his head before following his sensei's actions. Break. Kumo was an interesting village to say the least. Many clouds hovered due to the mountainous region. The general vibe was always stern if Jiraiya had to put a finger on it. It was the most militaristic major village, so it would make sense. Stick close. Don't need you offending anyone and everyone you meet. Especially in Kumo of all places. The sage told his student. If they are offended by the truth, then kami smite me. What a world we live in where being right is wrong. The young male shook his head slightly and stuck his hands into his pockets. Jiraiya just sighed at the statement before continuing to the checkpoint that would allow them access to the village. Halt! A voice yelled out before the duo even made it to the checkpoint. Jiraiya had sensed them before they appeared, and judging by his student's lack of response, he did as well. A Jonin from Kumo made his way to the duo. You are Jiraiya of the Sannin, yes. The man was glaring at the both of them as if they had done some world-ending action and brought destruction to the world. Jiraiya thought the man needed to get laid. Last I checked, I am indeed Jiraiya of the Sannin. Naruto could hear the snark in his sensei's voice. Seems he was genuinely annoyed about being stopped so close to the actual village. The young male just closed his eyes, uncaring of the entire situation. The man just seemed to glare harder at the statement and what he assumed was disrespect from the blonde. His glare deepened and he focused his attention on the young Jinchuriki. And you are. The scroll's information did not mention a boy tagging along. There was no mistaking the mocking tone in the man's voice. Naruto Uzumaki. The young male responded but didn't open his eyes. This man didn't bother him. He wasn't strong enough to pose a threat, nor was he threatening enough for the blonde to care. The Kumo Jonin narrowed his eyes at the boy before sneering. Leave, boy, else I make you do so. Jiraiya was half tempted to scream in frustration. This man was going to end up becoming roadkill. They'd have a national incident on their hands. You do not have the power nor tact to demand such things from me. You do not even know me. You are weak. You will always be weak. If you think you can force me to leave, then you are welcome to do so. Naruto raised his hands to his sides. The boy's eyes opened, if only slightly, to view the man who dare order him around. Jiraiya definitely wanted to scream in anger now. The man not only disrespected the blonde but disregarded him. It was two of the three things you didn't do. The sage would need to defuse the situation before it could get worse. You little shit. The Jonin's chakra spiked and a slight pressure spread through the surrounding, which only attracted the attention of nearby shinobi and Kumo's own version of the Anbu. Naruto's eyes opened to reveal his sapphire-colored pupils before glancing towards his teacher. In that brief moment a conversation was struck between the two. Jiraiya tried to stop the boy but he was too late. Naruto's chakra bombarded the area. The very ground he stood on cratered before exploding. Huge amounts of dirt, dust, and earth rocketed from his position. The pressure from the boy's release of chakra caused the Jonin to blast away from the Jinchuriki. Jiraiya's shoulders sagged slightly due to the pressure. Having been on the receiving end for the past 2.5 years, this was nothing new to the man. But it was going to cause trouble. Many of the shinobi were frozen from the raw display of chakra that the young man possessed. Some of the weaker nins in the area even being forced to their knees after the display. Break. A woman with blonde hair who was resting against a tree tensed before her eyes snapped open due to the raw amount of chakra. Her head turned towards the entrance of the village and a smirk framed her beautiful face. Ooh, now that's a lot of chakra. I can sense even more. Shall we go play Matabi? The young woman asked to seemingly no one. She disappeared in a burst of speed to where she felt the chakra spike. Break. Atop a mountain was a dark-skinned man with several blades in his hand and other various areas of his body. The man was twirling the blades in his possession in a symphony of agile and interesting moves that resembled breakdancing. He suddenly stopped and his head turned towards the direction of the village's gates and a smirk appeared on his face. Seems Mr. 9 has come to shine. He sheathed all 7 of his blades before he too disappeared in a burst of speed towards the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Break. The fourth Raikage was seated at his desk with his eyes closed before they suddenly snapped opened. He could sense the incredible amount of chakra just outside his gates. His first thought was that B or Yugito were causing it, but he didn't recognize this individual's signature. The muscular man sighed slightly as he sensed both Jinchurikis of Kumo rushing to the gates. The man had a meeting with Jiraiya of the Sannin later on and this situation was just going to annoy the man. I removed his hat before calling out to his secretary. Mabui, I'm going to investigate that source of chakra. A slight crack of electricity coated his body before he seemingly vanished from the room. His secretary entering a second later in annoyance. Break. The fourth Raikage landed slightly at the entrance to the front gates of his village. His cloak of electricity vanishing as soon as he touched the ground. The dark-skinned man immediately focused on the crater and the 2 males that stood side by side. He recognized Jiraiya of the Sannin and the other. That boy looked far too familiar. Eyes glanced to the toad sage before going back to the teen. Blonde, spiky hair, thin frame, blue eyes. Yes. This boy was definitely his child. There was no other explanation. The Raikage then glanced around at all his shinobi in the area. He had noticed the gigantic crater that stemmed from the young teen. It wasn't hard to guess that this boy, who was also his child, was the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The boy had far more chakra than even B did. If the teen was even half as talented as his father was, then his men most likely stood no chance. I began to walk slowly towards the duo. The young male had his arms crossed against his chest with his eyes closed. The toad sage had an annoyed expression on his face. B and Yugito touched down shortly after. Their gazes sought the young males and a tense silence entered the area. You two. Stay out of this. I didn't even turn around to acknowledge his strongest shinobi and kept his attention on the duo in front of him. The Raikage got within 5 feet of the two men and stopped. His two Jinchurikis following. It was quiet for several short moments before Jiraiya eventually sighed and decided to get to the point. My student and I arrived and were immediately set upon by one of your shinobi. The man threatened my student and my student retaliated. The toad sage's eyebrow twitched slightly afterwards. I was silent before his gaze swept to the blonde who still refused to open his eyes. The Raikage then glanced to one of his men stationed at the gate and asked if what the sage said was true. Yes, sir. The Jonin gate guard replied. I turned back towards the duo before sighing. Bring the man here. Two Chunin proceeded to fulfill the Raikage's request. The Jonin was then dumped in front of the leader. I crouched down slightly in front of the man and stared into his eyes. Did you threaten these two men? Yes. Yes, sir. The man's gaze was locked on the ground following his statement. I sighed loudly in annoyance before rising to his full height. Faster than the Jonin could react, he was kicked straight through the village's gates by I himself. The Jonin crashed through an unoccupied stand before coming to a stop. I apologize for my shinobi's actions. You are guests in my village and shall be treated as such. I then turned and swept his gaze on every shinobi that was present. If another transgression occurs with these two men unprovoked, you will be stripped in the gallows. Do I make myself clear? A loud chorus of, yes sir, chanted throughout the clearing. The Raikage nodded once before turning his gaze back to the two men in front of him. I believe we have a meeting to get to Jiraiya. Your student is welcome to join. The dark-skinned man offered. The young blonde finally opened his eyes, retaining that same blank face the entire time. He glanced at the Raikage before looking directly at his sensei. I appreciate the offer, Raikage-sama, but I will have to refuse. Naruto bowed slightly to the man. I do not wish to intrude on personal affairs. If it is all right with you, I would like a training ground to meditate in. I glanced to the young male before setting his gaze back on Jiraiya. That is fine, but considering who you are and what you hold, I will need to have my shinobi watching you. The young blonde just shrugged while nodding his head. That is acceptable. Thank you for the hospitality. The boy was incredibly different from his father. That blank expression had remained the entire time since arriving. Either the boy had an amazing poker face that could put veteran shinobi to shame, or it was just his normal expression. Yugito adopted a sultry smirk. Is it okay if I am the one to watch the boy Ai-sama? The young male was definitely powerful. If there was one thing that Yugito loved besides milk, it was fighting strong opponents. I gave a low sigh before eventually nodding. Behave yourself. I will not repeat myself a second time. The man warned. Yugito gave a cat-like grin at his warning and focused her attention on the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. I should be saying that to you, Naruto. Jiraiya stated. The young male just glanced at his sensei with his head tilted before shaking his head. The blonde began walking away towards the village gates, with Yugito immediately pouncing afterwards. B. Make sure she doesn't cause trouble. I trust her, but you know how she is. The Hachibi Jinchuriki just nodded and turned his attention to the toad sage before nodding towards him and disappearing shortly after. This is going to be a long day. Jiraiya's voice was tired and exasperated. That seems to be accurate. I following suit. Come. Let's talk in my office. The Raikage gestured and both men began walking to the designated area. Break. Naruto and Yugito walked side by side through the village as she led him to her personal training ground. The boy was quiet and didn't seem to talk all that much. Which wasn't necessarily a bad thing in Yugito's opinion. The boy was taller than her by a few inches and he walked with a confidence only veteran shinobi possessed. Considering the boy didn't look 18 years of age made the boy far more dangerous. Which again, wasn't a bad thing to Yugito. You're a quiet one, she stated as if fishing for a response. The boy didn't respond for several moments. The woman figured he wouldn't respond. I just prefer silence. It is calming to me. The boy lightly shrugged his shoulders following the statement. He was aware that the woman was similar to him. He assumed that she was the Nibi Jinchuriki. Yugito nodded her head at his statement. She assumed that he didn't mean anything negative by it. But he was a Jinchuriki that didn't belong to a village like Kumo. This village loves their Jinchurikis. Taking pride in actually praising Bee and herself. The blonde couldn't imagine growing up in a place where everyone treated you like trash. I assume you didn't have the best life in Konoha, did you? The woman questioned curiously. The boy's head turned towards her before focusing back on the path. You'd be correct. I was ostracized and feared my entire life due to something I had no control over. The villagers believed me to be the actual Biju that devastated their home. A foolish notion. There was no emotion that Yugito could detect in his voice. No bitterness or anger came from him. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. Could the boy's negative treatment be the cause? She didn't wish to say that he seemed slightly off, but you do not seem angry about it. The blonde questioned lightly. She was curious to see if she could get him to open up about the situation. After all, she didn't truly know how other Jinchurikis were treated. If you wish to know about my life in Konoha, you are free to just ask. Sensei says that I am emotionally stunted due to such negative human interaction. I do not understand basic human emotions. I also lack sympathy as well as empathy. The boy lightly shrugged following his statement. Sensei says that while I lack the understanding of emotions, I still have them. Which often causes confusion. The boy turned silent after his statement. Yugito was surprised to hear such delicate information about the young man. Was he not worried about? No, he wasn't. He just informed her that he wouldn't understand. It meant that she would only know what he truly wanted her to know. Anything that was actually deemed important to the young man would never be revealed. Interesting. The young male also hadn't made eye contact with anyone since her arrival at the front gates. His eyes would remain closed or they would stray away from the face when talking. The blonde didn't lack confidence given his general stride, so it definitely wasn't that. ADHD. No. There were very little movements with his hands and fingers. He'd be fidgeting with a kunai if that were the case. Autism. Now that seemed more likely in her opinion. Just from her brief interaction she could tell that mentally something wasn't right. Not that there was anything wrong with that. Given his treatment in Konoha, it wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to say so. It was unfortunate that someone who grew up a Jinchuriki like herself could be treated so inhumanly. The two Jinchurikis made it to Yugito's personal stomping grounds. She presented it with a slight, ta-da, and the like. The boy furrowed his eyebrows in confusion at the statement. It is quaint, away from others, secluded. He nodded his head. It is nice. Which looked entirely too weird due to his blank face. The boy began to walk to a nearby tree and planted himself in front of it. He rested his hands in his lap and then closed his eyes. Yugito watched him the entire time. Once he was seated in front of the tree, it seemed like his entire body just stopped moving. It was fascinating. Was he even breathing? It didn't look like it. A distinct calming aura settled in the area. The Nibi Jinchuriki noticed it almost immediately. This is nature chakra, Yugito. Matabi's voice explained. He is a sage. An incredibly gifted one as well. He is able to juggle his own chakra as well as the natural chakra that is ever flowing in the world. It is incredibly rare and difficult for you shinobi to achieve such a state. You can count the number of individuals to ever master the ability on one hand. Yugito was shocked to say the least. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed the pigmentation that surrounded the boy's eyes. An orange substance appearing around his eyes. There were several animals that seemed to drift towards the boy. Birds rested on his shoulders while several squirrels sat beside his knees. It was baffling and incredibly amazing to witness. Yugito had heard rumors of Jiraiya being a sage. Whether they were true or not was up for debate. But right before her very eyes she was witnessing what her Biju described as the coveted sage mode. But why show something so rare and powerful? The boy might not seem to care, but she technically wasn't an ally. This was free information to feed to her village. So why? Matabi's amused tone ringed in her head. Sage mode isn't just some fancy makeup. You would be incapable of matching the boy in combat. He would crush you into the ground. The fact that her own Biju was informing her of this was enough to make Yugito double take. She would get stomped. How strong of an increase of power was this? It is like comparing a genin to a cage. You would not win. The fact that Matabi's tone was so exact actually made the blonde pause. Naruto's eyes eventually opened and Yugito gasped at the change. He possessed a bar-like pupil similar to that of a toad while the actual color of the eyes were yellow. They were incredibly mesmerizing. The boy blinked and they returned to their sapphire tint. The calming aura vanished and subsequently the animals scurried away. The boy blinked several times before focusing on Yugito. There is 2 toad sages in this world. But there is only one toad sage who has fully mastered the ability. Yugito could easily assume he meant himself on that last bit. The action hadn't even took long. Several seconds and that power had came and then disappeared just as fast. Amazing. You are very forthcoming with such information. The woman crossed her arms against her chest. She wanted to see what he'd say. It is not like such information would truly be detrimental to me. Very few individuals in this world have gained the ability to wield nature chakra. No one is able to defend against it because no one can use it. The boy leaned against the tree and closed his arms. Just because you know I can use the ability does not mean you can beat me. You know nothing of what I can do with Sage Mode. Yugito didn't take offense to his statement. The boy seemed to just speak truths and facts. Incredibly blunt, yes, but truths nonetheless. Perhaps you would like to show me just what this Sage Mode can do then. The woman had a Cheshire grin adorned on her beautiful face. Regardless of how powerful her Biju informed her of his Sage Mode, she wanted to fight him now. The boy opened his eyes and stared at her with an eyebrow raised. That is illogical. Running headfirst into uncertain battles is never a good idea. But I like to fight. It gets my blood racing and my heart pounding. You would deny me such a fight? She had a faux hurt expression. The woman truly doubted it would work on the boy, but he did say that he possessed normal human emotions. He just didn't comprehend them. Naruto stared at the woman in slight confusion, which served to look incredibly adorable on his whiskered face. I did not intend to hurt your feelings. I am just perplexed at the reasoning. But if you wish to spar, then I will do so. My only wish is that you keep what you learn to yourself. Yugito blinked at that. She could agree to do so, but she could also lie and then later inform her cage. You seem to be putting some level of trust into me. I could agree and be lying. The younger blonde just shrugged before responding. That is how shinobi life is. If you choose to do so, I cannot stop you. I was only asking for the sake of doing so. Eventually I will be forced to use Sage Mode in an actual fight. If I do not kill the person or if there are bystanders, then people will know of my ability. I am just delaying the inevitable for as long as possible. It made sense to Yugito. The boy was truthful with everything that came out of his mouth. That or he was just an incredibly amazing liar. That'd be something. The blonde eventually just settled on agreeing to his terms. She got to fight with someone with an incredibly rare ability and all she had to do was keep it to herself. Why not? Though Matabi seemed highly amused at the entire situation. Would she truly get stomped so easily? Only one way to find out. I agree then. Now let's fight. I want to see just how powerful this sage mode really is. Following her statement, the woman flared the entirety of her chakra, and similar to the boy's action earlier, the ground cratered and an insane pressure settled in the training grounds. Naruto was unaffected, it would seem. The boy closed his eyes for several seconds before gaining access to sage mode. The boy rolled his neck slightly before standing to his feet. Crossing his arms against his chest, he opened his eyes and stared directly at the Nibi Jinchuriki. I will allow you the honor of attacking first. Yugito gave a feral smirk before charging towards the boy. She was going to enjoy this immensely. Break. This is annoying to say the least, Jiraiya. I directed to the man sitting across from him in his office. You say the group is comprised of S-rank nuke nins. The man's arms were crossed in front of his chest. The white-haired man nodded grimly. We encountered 2 of their members prior to electing our 5th Hokage. Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki. Both S-rank and both incredibly powerful. The fact that these are just 2 of the members makes you wonder who's the monster in charge of keeping these men and women in line. That was truly a terrifying thought to both men. To be able to keep men like Kisame Hoshigaki in line meant that the leader was nothing short of monstrous. This was a major problem. You are certain they are after the Biju? The man stared hard at Jiraiya. The sage just nodded with a grim face. Yes. Itachi's first words to Naruto were, please come with us, Kyuubi Jinchuriki. If that isn't enough proof, then I should just retire from the Corps. The man leaned against his chair with a sigh. I knew the circumstances regarding anything dealing with Jinchurikis and their Bijus. Anyone who wanted to kidnap the hosts couldn't be plotting anything good. It was a shit show waiting to happen. Have you informed the other leaders? I was curious to see if Jiraiya had took the risk of allowing Naruto into Iowa of all places. The white-haired man sighed at the question. I sent scrolls to all the other villages. Suna and Kiri responded, as well as you yourself. We have informed the Mizukage and Kazekage. Iowa remains to be seen. I'm certain my scroll was burned as soon as it entered. The man rolled his eyes in annoyance following the statement. Yes. Onoki is not only stubborn but a sore loser. There was a certain amount of humor in the Raikage's voice that made Jiraiya smirk. Akatsuki is a major threat at this point in time. I am not so foolish to believe that Kumo is indestructible. While I'm confident in our power, the title of S rank is not given so easily. There are reasons for this. Jiraiya nodded his head in agreement. While I do not expect cooperation or alliances or anything of the sort, I am merely wishing to help inform the villages. My godson's life is on the line, and if I am able to prevent his death, then I will do anything possible to keep it that way. I nodded his head at the Mont's statement. B was his brother and Yugito was his sister. He'd be damned if he lost both of them. I will see if I can get Onoki to reconsider. Perhaps I can talk some sense into the old bastard. I will inform my shinobi as well as. The man was cut off as he sensed Yugito's explosion of chakra in her training grounds. The Raikage immediately frowned while Jiraiya's eyebrows furrowed. I stood still with his eyes closed, getting a feel for her chakra. The man eventually just gave an annoyed sigh. Little shit almost gave me a heart attack. This talk of Akatsuki already has me jumpy. She is sparring with your student. Jiraiya gave a sigh of relief that was followed by a groan of annoyance. That boy is making me age far faster than I would like. He shook his head with an annoyed expression on his face. He wasn't getting any younger, damn it. You both are welcome to stay in the meantime. You have brought me important information. The least I can do is allow you two to stay to rest. The Raikage offered, and he meant it. This information was far too important to be brushed aside. Jiraiya gave a smile and nodded his head. I appreciate this, Raikage-sama. The man proceeded to stand up and bow slightly to the dark-skinned man. I called for Mabui to set up rooms for the sage and his students so they could rest for the next few days. If you want, I can explain to you what the definition of insanity is, Yugito-san. Naruto's monotonous voice stated in the training field. The boy's clothes were slightly scuffed with dirt and a few drops of sweat ran down the side of his face. Other than that, the boy looked as if he had just taken a light jog rather than beat down an elite jonin who harbored the Nibi for 2 hours. Said carrier of Nibi gave a low groan of agony before she began to shift and try to stand on her feet. Yugito's clothes were torn and caked with dirt and blood. A trickle of the copper substance ran down the side of her face as her beautiful face morphed into an angry scowl. What in the actual are you? Her voice came out hoarse and thick-laced with frustration. She managed to adjust her position to her hands and knees and began to stand. The blonde proceeded to heave slightly and a thick wad of blood flew out of her mouth. I am a sage. The boy responded. He gave a slow blink as the woman's face seemed to get even angrier. Did he say something wrong? He was a sage. Was his answer inadequate? Yugito's face pulled back into a feral snarl before her chakra spiked. It began to mix with her Biju's chakra, coalescing the two chakras into a beautiful shade of navy blue. Naruto watched on with slight curiosity. Perhaps she was finally going to take this serious. Maybe he should return the favor. It would be logical to give it your all if your opponent was going to be doing the same. Naruto tilted his head when several Kumo nin appeared beside Yugito. The whiskered teen immediately identified the dark-skinned man as the Hachibi Jinchuriki due to the amount of chakra he possessed as well as having seen him earlier, and 3 unknown shinobi who likely were Aro and his age. A blonde-haired woman with pale skin sporting a noticeable bust, a dark-skinned woman with unique red hair and another dark-skinned male with snowy white hair. Interesting bunch these 3 were. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki released his sage mode and proceeded to close his eyes while folding his arms across his chest. The Hachibi Jinchuriki was most likely here to prevent Yugito from accessing her Biju's chakra. Whether or not it was for his or her safety was up for debate. Synced Jinchuriki or not, he would still win. No need to get angry, Yugi. B had a large smirk following the statement. The 3 other individuals were staring directly at the male who had noticeably thrashed Yugito and would have forced her to use her Biju's power to even touch him. You interrupted our spar. We were about to get serious. The blonde teen almost seemed bothered. Hard to tell considering his voice was blank. Who in the hell are you anyway? It seemed the red hair was impatient and crass. But she had an above-average physique and the handle on the sword strapped to her back was kept incredibly clean. A skilled kenjutsu user. Like most of the shinobi in this village. Karui. Not cool. You remember what Raikage-sama told us, did you not? It almost appeared as if the woman with the larger-than-average bust was challenging her companion. Were they not a team? What if he's the long-lost son of the 4th Hokage? And you just insulted him. Oh man, not only will we be stripped in the gallows but a war with Konoha could happen. And if that happens then Kumo would be on a way ticket too. The male was cut off by his red-haired companion as she smacked him hard by the sound of his pained cry. What a unique dynamic. Why did you guys step in? I had this under control. Yugito gave a small hiss of pain after her words as B supported her left side. Sure you did, Yugi. Bro told me to rein you in if you took it too far. Judging by Mr. Nine's state, you didn't have anything under control. B had stated that jokingly, but the woman knew there was a hint of seriousness in that statement. She glanced over to the boy knowing what B said was true. This boy had destroyed her. To answer your earlier question, I am Naruto Uzumaki. You are a crass woman. The teen pointed out. It was completely normal to Yugito having actually had a conversation and then proceeding to fight the boy, that he would say something so pointedly. The red-haired female didn't take kindly at that. Though before she could say anything Yugito stepped in. Don't mind him, Karui. That's just how he is. He isn't trying to offend you. She leaned most of her weight on B and gave a small sigh of relief. He didn't try anything. He already did. Karui huffed out. The blonde-haired woman glanced at Naruto and gave a short bow to him. I am Samui. These are my two teammates. Karui and Omoi. She pointed to both respectively. Karui just glared at the boy and Omoi gave a short wave. Naruto's eyes opened for a slight moment before nodding his head at the trio. B. You called him Mr. 9. Does that mean? Samui questioned her leader. Killer B stared directly at Naruto for several seconds before nodding his head. It seems Mr. 9 is strong even without his partner EH. The Hachibi Jinchuriki stated with a small grin. It is what I am told in my village and by my sensei. The blonde teen looked directly into Killer B's eyes following that statement. Naruto's eyes were blank and unfocused for a few seconds before he shook his head. The Kyuubi and I prefer to be alone. I ask that you respect our decision. The Hachibi Jinchuriki nodded his head slowly while Yugito narrowed her eyes slightly. They both knew a warning when they heard it. There was emotion in that sentence. For what reason? They were unsure. The two locked eyes for a few moments before nodding slightly. If we are done here then I will take my leave. You did well Yugito. Naruto began to walk away before one of the trio called out to him. How about you spar with us three? Samui called out to the boy. Naruto glanced at her and then to her teammates before ending on B as if asking for permission. Killer B gave a nod with a grin before he disappeared with Yugito in a shunshin. The man trusted them with an unknown individual who proved capable of battering one of their strongest shinobi. The man was either very stupid or had an ulterior motive. Naruto didn't understand his actions but the man was already gone. The blonde Jinchuriki shifted his body towards Samui idly noticing that her teammates already moved into positions just out his sight. They were competent which was already a good sign to Naruto. Sensei did often say that a good shinobi takes advantage of any and all situations. Even after witnessing one of your strongest comrades in her state you still wish to fight me. The boy tilted his head with a slightly confused expression. Samui compared it to that of a young child asking their parents a question to something they didn't know. It was cute. Are you mocking us? That's not very cool Whiskers. I may not be a Jinchuriki but I have years of experience. The busty blonde shifted most of her weight on her right leg. Naruto blinked at her comment before his eyes roamed up and down her body. He stared for several seconds before his head tilted to the left. Years. You look as old as me. How old are you? Samui narrowed her eyes at the boy as he stared at her body. He wasn't ogling her body and he genuinely seemed to want to know. Yugito had stated that he didn't try to offend if his earlier comment on Karui was anything to go by. He was a Jinchuriki, probably wasn't treated all that well. I am 29. It is rude to ask a woman her age Naruto-san. Samui fingered the sheath of her katana as the words came out. The whiskered teen gave a blink and bowed slightly towards her. I did not mean to offend. You are a beautiful woman. His face gave no emotions away but Samui could tell he was just being honest. The young male probably didn't interact with others and just isolated himself to deal with the treatment of being a Jinchuriki. That made Samui frown slightly. Regardless of being a potential enemy in the future, it was just sad that someone could be treated like this for something they didn't have control over. She shook her head slightly and focused her attention on his body. He wasn't tense and his eyes closed after his statement. He didn't seem like the cocky type, and considering he beat the shit out of Yugito earlier. Samui gave a low sigh and made eye contact with her team. She gave a slight nod and their bodies tensed slightly. She rolled her neck to the left slightly, earning a low pop before she seemed to blur in front of the whiskered teen. Naruto's eyes opened slightly as Samui appeared in his vision. Her katana was headed straight towards his shoulder from her overhead swing. Naruto flicked a kunai into his hand and a shower of sparks illuminated the two as he blocked the woman's attack. As he locked his kunai against the busty woman's sword, he noticed Karui moving towards his left side. His eyes left Samui and turned towards his right as he kicked out with his right leg before Omoi could blindside him. The boy managed to shift his own blade to take most of the power of the kick, but he still rocketed away due to the force of the hit. With his leg still outstretched from his action, he shifted slightly and removed his weight on Samui's blade. The woman's eyes widened slightly at the action. Her weight continued on the blade as it slammed against the ground just as Karui made it to the duo. Naruto spun on his left leg due to his movement and hooked his right foot under Samui's blade before flicking it towards her teammate. The blonde could let her sword go and trust Karui had the capability to block it, but the idea of being in a taijutsu battle with the Jinchuriki was unappealing. Samui began to move in tandem with her blade so as to prevent that outcome. Naruto glanced at Karui before he threw the kunai in his hand towards her. When the kunai flew from his hand, the boy made a single hand sign. Karui grit her teeth as she blocked the thrown weapon before a fist planted into the left side of her face. The girl was unprepared for the strike as she spun slightly through the air. Samui's eyes widened as she noticed that in her lapse of concentration the boy had created a clone. The clone turned its gaze on her before it palmed two kunais and began attacking her in a flourish of strikes and spins. The clanging of metal and sparks rang out as the woman defended against her attacker. The boy was incredibly fast and he had power behind every strike. He left no openings and didn't seem to waste a single movement. The clone slashed low with its right hand and began to shift slightly. Samui's eyes followed the arc of his left hand as it cleaved through the air towards her temple. The sound of metal tinking against the ground was her only warning before a fist rammed straight into her jaw. The boy dropped his weapon when he began shifting. Due to his aggressive attacks, she could do little to defend against the punch. The woman's skull rocked slightly at the blow before she felt two hits follow up towards her abdomen. Spit launched from her mouth as the blows connected. A boot was heading towards her face as she managed to finally get over her daze. She wasn't going to be able to dodge it. Before the clone's foot could make contact, she was saved from further damage when Omoi intervened and took a strike at the clone. The clone struck his blade with the sole of its boot before flipping off of it to put distance between them. The real Naruto began to walk towards his clone and stood beside it with his hands in his pockets. "You've lost," he stated plainly and shifted his head towards their third comrade. The two Kumo nin were confused for all but 1 second before they immediately searched for Karui. The red hair was on her back while a clone of Naruto restricted her hands with his legs and had a kunai resting on her neck. The girl's face was glaring at the clone's neutral expression. "Sloppy. You have good chemistry but lack situational awareness. You should have regrouped every time I forced you apart. The only chance of beating a superior opponent is with teamwork." The two clones went up into smoke and disappeared. Naruto crossed his arms and continued. "When I mean teamwork, I mean it. Being able to attack and work off of each other is commendable, but it wouldn't be enough for someone like me. Konoha has remained as powerful as it has been because teamwork is something that is fundamentally endowed in the teachings. You should know what your teammates do before they do. It takes a certain level of communication and trust to do such things. But I was not privy to such things." The boy shifted slightly and stared into the clouds that Kumo harbored. "I prefer to be alone. I work better alone. I'm stronger alone. I know that chances of survival are higher when working with others, and it's logical to wish to be a part of something more than yourself, but I wish to detach myself from such notions." The boy shook his head slightly at that before directing his attention back to the squad of 3. Jiraiya-sensei would tell you 3 that until you can trust each other with your lives that you'll never be able to beat a superior opponent. Karui glared slightly from her seated position at his accusation. "I trust them with my life. How the hell do you know what I feel?" The blonde glanced at her before shaking his head. "No, you don't. You hesitate." Should I place you in a predicament where you need to thrust your life into the hands of those two you would drown? More accurately, into Omoi-san's hands. Samui frowned slightly at his statement. It was something that she knew all too well from experience. Shinobi get to her age due to skill, talent, and trust. Many shinobi didn't believe in luck. There were many times that Samui had to trust her comrades when in battle. She was confident in their ability and they reciprocated it. If what Naruto was saying was true, then something needed to be changed. She glanced at Omoi and noticed he had a slight frown and his eyes were locked onto the dirt. It seemed the both of them didn't truly trust the other with their lives. Your teammate has doubts. As do you, Karui-san. Until they are fixed, then you will die when on a high-stakes mission for your village. The blonde began to walk out of the clearing. I state these things so the next time we fight you are more competent. Samui gave a sigh and sat on the ground while sheathing her blade. He's right, you know. Karui gave her a look of betrayal and Omoi grimaced a bit. What do you mean he's right? Because he is. Would you trust Omoi? Before Karui could reply, Samui interrupted. I mean it. If you had to rely only on Omoi to save you from enemy capture or anything of the like, would you trust he has the ability to carry out the task? The blonde stared hard into Karui's eyes before the redhead turned her head away with an ashamed gaze. Exactly. These are things we must work on. I'm not angry with the both of you. I'm disappointed. We've only been a squad for half a year, yes, but you both need to lift the other instead of bringing each other down. I can't stress the importance of relying on each other more. She rubbed her shoulders before continuing. Do you think I say these things for my own amusement? You two need to get along. I let it slide for the first couple of months, but I'm stomping it here and now. Do I make myself clear? She eyed both of them and gave a hard stare as they nodded meekly. The busty woman proceeded to get up before gesturing with her sword for them to follow suit. Then prove it. Until you both can best me with teamwork, we will not be leaving this area. Before the two could protest, Samui gave them a fierce glare. That was an order. Disobey it and I'll make this even harder on you. I should have done this when we formed this squad. I will not sit by and watch you two die on the field because of a lack of camaraderie. Now shut up and ready your blades. Break. Naruto pulsed his chakra as he left the training ground. He immediately locked onto Jiraiya's signature and began to make his way to his sensei. As he began to make his way through the village, the boy's thoughts began to unravel and focus on a certain person. Tsunade Senju, or Auntie Tsunade, as she preferred to be called. She had declared herself as his self-imposed guardian when he and Jiraiya were sent to retrieve her. The mission was a success. Naruto believed it so. The woman did return and indeed did take the hat. That was their mission after all. Of course, there were many stipulations following soon after. She was the Hokage and she had made sure the village knew it. Hiruzen had been far more lenient in his reign as the Hokage, and more often than not things would be swept under the rug. But when Auntie Tsunade took the hat, things got dirty and bloody. She had dug into files upon files of many of Konoha's darker ploys that Hiruzen and Danzo had enforced. The woman wasn't stupid. She knew that every village had its more darker side, but Danzo was a different story. While Hiruzen had kept Naruto out of the crippled Warhawk's grasp, she knew it was only a matter of time before he would strike. Tsunade hadn't allowed that. She decided to handle it the, as she put it, Uzumaki way. By killing the man. Yes. It was that simple. She had even gone so far as to welcome anyone who would further challenge her rule to the hat. Abuse of power would lead to a revolt. Such a thing had merits, yes, but the shinobi of Konoha also had to realize who they were dealing with. That individual being Tsunade Senju. The woman who could cause earthquakes with kicks and topple mountains with punches. A woman whose spirit was alight with flame after meeting Naruto. The blonde teen didn't truly understand the significance of their meeting at the time, but Jiraiya sensei had tried to explain to him the importance of it. Thousands of shinobi against a single woman seemed reasonable, yes. Incorrect. Against Tsunade, numbers were irrelevant. She was still in her prime. The Sannin were famous for a reason due to their strength. Many shinobi liked to believe that Jiraiya or Orochimaru were the ones to be feared, but only true shinobi knew the danger that the medic presented. It was why Orochimaru retreated when Tsunade truly got involved in the fight. Kabuto had been heavily damaged by Naruto, and their only chance to truly survive was to turn tail and escape. It was unfortunate that the snake managed to get away. It would have been quite a large sum of money to get if his head was turned in at the bounty boards. Another day perhaps. Naruto was confident that the snake wouldn't be able to truly match him. After all, Sasuke was dead and he had no true vessel. It would only be a matter of time before someone decided to kill the pale bastard. Entering the hotel, Naruto made his way to his shared room with Jiraiya and opened the door. The blonde stopped at the door and gazed into the room with mild confusion. He hadn't done another cursory pulse of his chakra after the initial one. So the fact that a woman was now in their room was surprising. Even more so considering she wasn't glaring at his sensei. She possessed snowy white hair that complemented her dark skin. She was a beautiful woman. Naruto slowly blinked and just shook his head while bypassing the scene and heading directly into the bathroom for a shower. Not even bothering to greet the woman or his sensei. The woman raised a delicate eyebrow as the shower head turned on. "You have an interesting student, Jiraiya-san." The older male just smiled as he continued scribbling on his notepad. "Yes, he is. Naruto has an interesting and unique outlook on life." He ended it with that. It wasn't his place to inform the woman of his student's behavior. She could ask him herself. The room was quiet for several minutes following Jiraiya's statement, with the occasional noise of a pencil scrawling over paper. Mabui closed her eyes and rested against the chair she sat in. I had informed her that Jiraiya and his student were to be treated as important guests. She was to be their guide for the next following days to ensure things were to their liking. The woman didn't know why the Raikage saw these two as such important individuals, considering they weren't lords or delegates from other villages. Just two shinobi on a training trip. She gave a low sigh as the sound of running water cut off. A minute later and the Toad Sage's student came out with a towel wrapped around his neck. The boy had no shirt on but was mindful enough to wear shorts. Mabui was thankful for that. Giving a lady a free show, Naruto. Where are your manners? Jiraiya's voice was teasing. I have them. You are the one who is lacking in that department. This is my room. The boy proceeded to dry his damp hair with his towel. She is also a shinobi. If seeing the skin of another male causes a reaction, then she is unworthy of her position, no. He glanced towards the Jonin and locked eyes with her. Mabui stared back with a calm gaze. The boy was lacking in emotion. The way he phrased his words had no mocking bite to them and just seemed to state the obvious facts. She would indeed not be worthy of her title and rank if something this minor was thrown at her. You would be correct, Naruto-san. Though I understand that I stopped by unannounced, it is still polite to dress properly and introduce yourself. She crossed her legs in her seat and watched in slight amusement as the boy tilted his head. The blonde gave a slight nod before picking a scroll on the bed and unsealing a new change of clothes. He proceeded to put on his shirt and introduce himself. I am Naruto Uzumaki. Forgive me if I offended you. The blonde slightly bowed to her following his statement. The dark-skinned woman waved her hand dismissively at his apology. It is fine, Naruto-san. I am Mabui. I am to be your guides for the remainder of your stay. The boy stared at her face for several seconds before his eyes roamed down her body. Mabui raised an eyebrow at his blatant actions. I'm starting to see the logic of your statement, sensei. I have indeed noticed that every kunoichi is in fact beautiful. The boy nodded his head slightly before taking a seat by the window of the hotel room and staring outside. I never lie when it comes to women, Naruto. The man continued writing but had a larger than normal grin adorned on his face. I'd believe you if Auntie Tsunade hadn't punched you through 4 walls on our first meeting. You were ogling her body then and you continued to do so even upon our departure from Konoha. A heavy pressure appeared in the room following his statement. Mabui's eyebrows furrowed in confusion after the boy's statement. The room was deathly silent and there was a tension that made the woman slightly uncomfortable. The scribbling of Jiraiya's pencil stopped and he immediately fixated his gaze on Naruto. If Jiraiya had any uncertainties about the boy's infatuation with his teammate, then they were dashed immediately. It seemed his student wasn't even aware of what he was doing. Jiraiya began to glance around the room and noticed that the walls were beginning to shake and the floor was starting to creak. Mabui grimaced as the boy's chakra began to seep out in concentrated pulses. Whatever was going on wasn't good at all. Naruto, stop. Jiraiya's voice was firm. The pressure stopped increasing but it didn't disappear. The blonde continued to gaze out the window but his eyes were lit with anger. If you were any other person, you'd be dead. The blonde's tone was layered with acid as he practically spit the response out. If there was one emotion that Naruto was truly intimate with, it'd most certainly be anger. Anger was a simple emotion even in its various subforms. There was no confusion when a cloud of hateful energy wrapped around you. Naruto had plenty of it stored up in his body. The fact he was even able to master Sage Mode in spite of these facts was truly incredible. Mabui shifted uncomfortably as she sat in the crossroads of these two. Hearing the boy's statement was slightly worrying. Was Jiraiya going to push the issue? Is that a threat? Jiraiya's voice came out calm despite the tense situation. I don't make threats. Every word I speak is the truth. The boy continued to stare out the window and refused to even glance at the other occupants. Jiraiya knew a volatile situation when he saw one. His student was quite literally a ticking time bomb. Anything in regards to Tsunade was off limits. It seemed the boy was subconsciously channeling that same protectiveness that she did to him. The sage had teased the boy multiple times on their training trip about it and he had noticed that every time he pushed it further Naruto would display his emotions. The question now though, does he push it further? You are upset Naruto. Jiraiya calmly stated. It was for the best if he did not push it. The older man wasn't actually sure if he could truly subdue the boy should he choose to use Sage Mode. The abilities of a sage heightened your own power by leagues. It was literally comparing a genin to a cage after the boost. His student didn't respond to the statement but Jiraiya knew he was listening. Do you feel it? The older male crossed his arms slightly as he glanced towards the silent Mabui whose entire body was tense. Quote. I prefer you not speak of Tsunade in my presence. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes at Rhe's statement. It was his own way of saying, this makes me angry. It wasn't much but he could work with that. And why is that? She and I are teammates after all. He noticed that Naruto rolled his neck slightly to the left while a breath vacated his body. He was getting agitated it seemed. You do not respect her. The boy's hands began to curl and uncurl at timed intervals. Jiraiya was unaware due to the positioning of Naruto's body. Naruto's eyes began to bleed red as he stared out the window while his hands continued their repetitive actions. Why Auntie Tsunade puts up with your deplorable actions is beyond me. The pressure began to rise and the room began to shake again due to Naruto's anger. Mabui flinched as the pressure wrapped around her entire body. Jiraiya gave a hard frown and proceeded to stand up. He would soon regret the next words that came from his mouth. You are being irrational Naruto. You don't even understand why you're angry in the first place. What would Tsunade say if she... He was cut off as Naruto's fist embedded itself into his stomach. The toad sage flew through the hotel room door and crashed into the room directly opposite of theirs. Mabui's eyes widened as she noticed the crimson cloak covering the boy. 2 large, floppy ears sat atop his head and 3 tails waves behind him slowly. The amount of anger and rage wafting off the boy was enough to cause the woman to retch slightly. B and Yugito's chakra cloak couldn't compete with this. And this was only 3 tails. I'm being irrational. You are lucky that I respect you and appreciate everything you've done for me. Mabui cringed at the alteration of his voice. Something that should only exist in the deepest and darkest of nightmares. Jiraiya slowly walked back into the room with a minor limp, ignoring the onlookers and shinobi that were now investigating. Perhaps he shouldn't have pushed the boy. He deserved a bit of it. A light punch if anything. Certainly not full-powered. He was sure a rib or two was broken now. The cloak that previously surrounded the blonde now began to dissipate. His face adopted a frown and he shifted his body towards the window. I want to go back to Konoha. I'm finished. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes. They had 6 more months left for their trip, but in all honesty the boy already learned everything Jiraiya had to teach him. They were only on this trip due to the threat of the Akatsuki. The sage felt the need to warn the other villages to be on the lookout for members of the mercenary group. The older male sighed slightly before nodding his head. There's not much left I could teach you. So if you truly wish to, I can send a message to Tsunade now. The boy shook his head, which surprised the male before Naruto closed his eyes. We leave tonight or I go myself. Jiraiya's eyes widened at the statement. By himself? For what reason? Because he was upset due to their conversation. Naruto. Tonight. The boy actually glared at the man for several seconds before disappearing in a shunshin. The room was silent for several moments before Mabui shifted uncomfortably and began to leave. I hope you enjoyed your brief stay at our village. She proceeded to vacate the building to inform the wreckage of the situation that just happened. Jiraiya just sighed before giving a slight hiss of pain. The kid hit hard. I personally feel like you overreacted, Naruto. Jiraiya voiced in a slight petulant tone. Sometimes I wonder who the sensei really is between the two of us. Naruto's voice was the usual monotone, but Jiraiya could sense the admonishing undertone. Haim will reprimand you. The toad sage pointed out plainly. Jiraiya wasn't looking for another reason to anger the boy. A fact was a fact. You can't really assault your commanding officers. The blonde glanced at his teacher before shutting his eyes and turning back to the road. She would give me a hug and pat me on the back. You are delusional. Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched in annoyance at the boy's retort. It was most likely true. His teammate was incredibly fond and aggressively protective of the boy. The last person who tried their hand at the boy was Danzo. That man no longer exists. It would take the demand of Kami herself to tear Tsunade away from the young man. I swear I get no respect. The man was downright being a child and he knew it. I do respect you, Jiraiya-sensei. But I respect Auntie Tsunade far more than you. I also enjoy her company far more than you. Naruto's statement only seemed to deflate the older man even further. Do you enjoy hurting me, you brat? The boy didn't even glance in his direction and kept silent. Yes he did. The two shinobi fell into a comfortable silence afterwards on their trip back to Konoha. Naruto had indeed insisted on leaving immediately. There wasn't much Jiraiya could do to stop him. He was more than capable of fending for himself. Naruto's head rotated slightly to the right and he stopped moving. His eyes remained shut but his head tilted slightly. It seems we have company. They are very strong if judging by their chakra pools. Jiraiya had sensed them slightly after his student. The boy was an immaculate sensor after becoming a perfect sage. It was truly impressive the feats a perfect sage could pull off. A few moments passed before 2 figures appeared in the clearing. Both individuals were garbed in a similar pair of black cloaks that had red clouds adorned on them. One was definitely a man and the other was more akin to a fish mutant of some sort. Itachi Uchiha. Naruto's monotone voice invaded the silent clearing. The blonde's eyes were still closed but his head was facing directly toward the man. Naruto-kun. You've grown. Itachi's face was as blank as the boy he was talking with. Jiraiya glanced between the two members before focusing on the other member. Kisame Hoshigaki. It's been a while. The Toad Sage had an uncharacteristic serious expression on his face. This was dangerous. Jiraiya was certain that the both of them could handle this situation, but when it comes to shinobi there's always that chance of death. These two were monsters. You and the brat got lucky last time. It's not gonna happen again. Samahade has been itching for a piece of ya. Kisame's grin was far too large for Jiraiya's liking. You talk too much. Naruto's sapphire orbs gazed at the shark-like man. You're annoying. Stay silent. Following the boy's comment, the ground beneath the Akatsuki duo exploded and several clones of Naruto attacked Kisame. Itachi disappeared in a flock of crows while Kisame began to batter away the group. Naruto shut his eyes before holding up a half-ram handseal. The clones that surrounded Kisame began to glow white before expanding and detonating. The explosion rocked the very foundation they were standing on, blowing up massive chunks of earth and several trees being reduced to ash. Jiraiya's mane of hair was blown back due to the force of the explosion. You deal with Kisame. Itachi wants me. Naruto began to walk towards the Reaper of the Uchiha with his hands in his pockets. Itachi was an incredibly powerful shinobi, but like all shinobi he had a weakness. And Itachi's weakness was extremely potent. The blonde would most certainly take advantage of it. Be careful, Naruto. Tsunade wants you to return. Remember that promise. The sage asked as he stared at the massive cloud of dust that was beginning to dissipate from Naruto's jutsu. Yes, I do. Itachi cannot beat me. The outcome will be the same every time. Well, at least his confidence is high. That was always a plus. Jiraiya shook his head and began to dash at the cloud of smoke. Naruto was arguably stronger than he was. If there was anyone who could match Itachi's prowess, it would definitely be his student. Naruto continued his trek towards his target. It was only a matter of time before he and Itachi were to meet in person. He did kill his precious little brother after all. Sasuke abandoned Konoha on his own terms. If Itachi had a problem with it, then so be it. Brothers follow brothers after all. Which was ironic because the elder brother abandoned Konoha not on his own volition. Sasuke truly was a fool. You are confident. Itachi's disembodied voice resonated through the clearing. Naruto stopped moving and began to rotate his head to random locations in the forest. His gaze would fixate on a specific point each time his head would stop, almost as if he was seeing something not there. Impressive. You are able to track me even through my genjutsu. Itachi materialized in front of Naruto. The blonde remained still even as Itachi finally appeared. Do you wish to fight now? The Jinchuriki began to flex his muscles in preparation. His hands coming out his pockets and his eyes slowly opening to reveal his eyes. Chakra began to seep out his body and settle around the clearing that surrounded the area. Itachi glanced around slightly before eyeing the boy. To have so much chakra that you can negate area-wide genjutsus is truly monstrous. The blonde clenched his hands following the Uchiha's statement. Itachi noticed it immediately. A knee-jerk reaction. It seemed his treatment in the leaf caused far more damage than Sarutobi had predicted. The pressure was also increasing. An angry Jinchuriki is a dangerous Jinchuriki. Itachi knew that a prolonged fight was a disadvantage for him. The ground beneath the blonde cratered due to the exertion. I meant no harm in my statement. A poor choice of words on my part. The Reaper continued to observe the blonde even as the boy's chakra rippled through the area. Itachi could actually see his chakra, it was so potent. Should they come to blows, it would truly be a difficult fight. Truthfully, Itachi had wanted to speak to Naruto privately about what happened. The man wasn't angry, only curious as to what truly happened. There were only two people who truly knew what happened during Naruto and Sasuke's fight. Itachi wasn't going to take the risk of speaking with the fifth Hokage. I don't suppose you're open to the idea of a simple conversation. The infamous Uchiha questioned. His dujutsu bore into the Jinchuriki, who stared directly back into them without a care. Itachi was now aware that Naruto was even more dangerous than before. The Uchiha blinked and Naruto's face appeared a foot away. The boy's left fist was on course to the older male's temple. Itachi's Sharingan could see the air being physically split from the sheer speed of the Jinchuriki's punch. Blocking was absolutely impossible. He'd have to be on the defensive this entire fight and only redirect blows. Timing would be his only counter to such force and speed. Itachi stepped back as the fist sailed past his head. Before being able to retaliate with an attack of his own, he was forced to jump back as a clone appeared above the boy. A boot careening towards his skull that would take him out of commission should he be hit by it. The Uchiha's hands shifted through 7 seals in a single second. A stream of fire erupted from his lips afterwards. The force from the jutsu pushed him back in air to further the distance between the two. His crimson eyes snapped to the left as the boy yet again appeared directly in his blind spot. He knows the Sharingan's field of vision. Itachi weaved his hand and gripped the wrist of the Jinchuriki. He immediately twisted the appendage and pulled downwards while shooting his knee towards the boy's stomach. The blonde casually raised his knee, stopping the blow from making contact with his abdomen. Both prodigies locked gazes for all but a second. Naruto's foot curled around Itachi's ankle and he locked the appendages together. Itachi braced his body as the blonde crouched lightly on his remaining leg. The boy fell backwards and dragged the older male with him. The two shinobi were perpendicular to the ground as Naruto's foot sprang back towards his abdomen and shot out with terrifying speed towards the Uchiha. The Uchiha managed to direct the blow outwards using his palm. The foot still scraped the side of his hip and he was forced to relinquish the hold he had on the boy. Itachi was sent into the air due to the kick. Even after being weakened, he was still pushed airborne. Naruto placed a single hand on the ground to balance himself and he flipped into a crouch and immediately rocketed towards the Akatsuki member. A giant fireball was sent in retaliation for his efforts. The blonde clicked his teeth together as the jutsu swallowed him whole before eventually imploding in on itself. Itachi landed without a sound and stared directly at the explosion. The male was well aware that it would take far more to even put a dent on the boy. Jinchuriki were durable and a single fireball would possibly only annoy him. Fighting an Uchiha is annoying. Itachi's gaze swept behind him and he stared at the boy who had naught but a singe on his body. His arms were crossed and he was staring at the sky. You all fight the same. The boy shook his head and redirected his attention towards the Uchiha. The boy's hands came to rest together and Itachi felt a surge of chakra explode from the boy. It's only fair that I fight the same. Itachi's eyes widened as a tornado of wind exploded out from Naruto's body. He began to retreat as the wind tore through the earth. It shredded several trees to small bits of lumber as it continued to grow in size. The unknown jutsu was absolutely devastating. The winds were roaring with a hunger that could only be satiated with destruction. Then, it began to move. The natural disaster was sent careening through the destroyed clearing, swallowing everything in its path and rendering the earth to dust from the razor-sharp winds that emanated from it. Itachi frowned as he thought of ways to deal with this predicament. The boy's jutsus were on a level of destruction that only someone like Pain could properly match. The Uchiha doubted the boy was even trying. His dujutsu could see the hundreds of thousands of wind blades shooting out from the tornado. A tornado of pure wind with thousands of wind blades shrouding it in an invisible dome of microscopic-like needles designed to disintegrate. It was as magnificent as it was deadly. The older male knew that Naruto was exploiting his illness. The boy could easily keep him at bay with jutsus like this. He would either have to waste large amounts of chakra to subdue it or be forced to use his Susanoo. Both of which were unfavorable to the Uchiha. His vision was already beginning to thin as it was. Using his Mangekyo Sharingan would be his only saving grace, that is if he could manage to actually land a hit on the boy. The blonde's speed was incredible. Itachi's Sharingan began to spin and morph until it fully changed from the trio of tomos, with it now resembling a three-bladed shuriken. Red chakra flared around him as his Susanoo began to form around his body. It appeared skeletal in appearance as the skull bobbed slightly. A ribcage formed around Itachi which then extended upwards forming the torso while two arms shot out of the torso. After the full skeletal structure appeared, muscles began to form around the skeleton. The arms flexed slightly as a shield appeared in its right hand and a shield in the left. A headpiece appeared on the head as robes shrouded the being. There in all its glory, was the Uchiha clan's ultimate defensive and offensive ability. The Susanoo's eyes glowed bright orange as it banged its sword against its shield. Itachi raised his arm and made a slashing motion as the celestial being mimicked his movements. The colossal being gave a roar before slashing directly into the tornado. The tornado held for several seconds before it began to warp in distortion. The sword cleaved through the jutsu a second afterwards and a massive explosion of wind detonated the battleground. It took half a minute for the raging winds to finally settle. Itachi surveyed the damage of the battleground. Truly monstrous. The explosion had cratered the earth a dozen feet directly down with a diameter of almost 20 meters outwards. I feel honored to witness the Uchiha clan's most powerful ability in action. Though, it's unfortunate it will be the last. Itachi's eyes tracked the boy's movement as he jumped out of the massive crater. The Uchiha immediately noticed the difference of the boy. Foreign chakra shrouded around the boy and his eyes were different. Orange pigmentation colored his eyes and his stance was relaxed unlike the previous exchange of fists. His pupils were toad-like in appearance with a horizontal bar. The boy's arms were crossed against his chest as he slowly began to make his way towards the ancient protector that was the Susanoo. If you somehow manage to survive this fight, then I will tell you how Sasuke died. Itachi's eyes narrowed at the statement. Was the boy truly so confident in his ability to best the Susanoo? The Uchiha motioned his Susanoo to attack. The Titan raised its sword high into the air before it dropped in the blink of an eye. The weapon of chakra sliced through the air so quickly that a sonic boom erupted from the force. The Susanoo's weapon made contact with the Jinchuriki and an explosion of dust blanketed the area from the attack. The dust began to fade and only then did Itachi truly begin to understand why the boy was so confident. The older male couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The blonde was holding the sword of the Susanoo, almost casually without a hint of worry. His celestial being was struggling to drive the weapon down as the blonde's arm weren't even showing signs of strain. The Uchiha's mouth opened slightly as he tried to understand what was happening. He had brought the full force of the Susanoo down upon him and was rewarded with nothing. The palm of the boy's hand wasn't even cut. Naruto's eyes locked with Itachi's and a bored expression appeared on his face. He shifted his arm upwards and the arm and sword of the Susanoo flew directly into the air. Itachi's eyes widened as his Susanoo shifted backwards from the show of strength. It was unreal. Naruto sped towards his opponent to take advantage of his unbalanced being. The Susanoo raised its shield to block Naruto from getting close. The blonde reared his fist back before rocketing it towards the Yata mirror. Upon impact, Itachi was shocked to witness the Susanoo actually being pushed back. How? The Yata mirror was capable of negating all physical and spiritual attacks. Itachi grit his teeth as his feet began to dig in the dirt from being physically moved. How much power did the boy possess? The Jinchuriki shifted his body before pushing even more strength into his punch. His entire body twisted and chakra rippled out from the center of his fist. The Uchiha braced himself as his Susanoo was rocketed backwards from the punch. The Titan flew for several meters as the chakra construct dug its sword into the earth to halt its movement. Immediately after the Jinchuriki attacked again, though this time he came from above. The two locked eyes for a split second as the Yata mirror appeared directly in the line of sight. Naruto shifted his body and raised his entire right leg in the air. His foot crashed into the shield of the Susanoo with a force that rattled Itachi's teeth. The ground beneath the Susanoo exploded and Itachi gave a grunt of pain at the attack. The absolute power from the attacks was physically weakening his Susanoo and his body. Naruto's foot remained centered on the shield for all but a second before he raised his hand into the air. A Rasengan began to form in his hands before it started to expand in size. The spiraling ball of pure chakra soon grew to the size of a small house. Senpo. Cho-Odama Rasengan. Naruto slammed the gigantic ball of rotating chakra into the Uchiha's construct. The ground exploded out from beneath the Susanoo. Itachi's teeth gnashed together as he struggled to hold up the Yata mirror from the jutsu. The ball of chakra continuously grinded against the shield, forcing the Susanoo even further into the ground. Itachi's body shook in pain and blood ejected itself from his mouth. His body just couldn't handle the amount of punishment that was being bestowed upon him. He gave a grunt of pain as the robes of the Susanoo ripped off, revealing the muscular form of the celestial being. Naruto rotated his wrist 180 degrees and the ball of destruction began to swirl erratically and distort from his action. Wind chakra began to circulate around the overpowered Rasengan before the boy let the jutsu implode on itself. The blonde knew that his sage mode would protect his body from the blades of wind that would erupt. A gigantic explosion rang through the clearing. A mushroom cloud of dust skyrocketed into the air and settled in the entire clearing. The absolute devastation from Naruto letting his jutsu implode on itself was incredulous. The once green forest was now reduced to nothing but earth and soil. A barren landscape of nothing but rock and clay. Once the dust settled, Naruto was standing above the defeated form of Itachi. The Uchiha's Akatsuki robes were shredded and blood ran down his eyes and mouth. His vision was blurry as he stared into the unique eyes of his opponent. Naruto raised a single eyebrow as he gazed at Itachi. He was impressed that the man was able to block one of his strongest jutsus and actually survive. You didn't use Tsukuyomi. Why? The blonde questioned out curiously. He crossed his arms as he stared at the Reaper of the Uchiha. He knew the jutsu was useless on someone like him, but he was still curious. Using such a taxing jutsu that isn't guaranteed to work is foolish. It is not as if my body could handle the strain it would give me. You exploited my illness as well as the weakness of the Mangekyo Sharingan. The Uchiha coughed up blood following his statement. The Jinchuriki proceeded to just stare at the elder male before shifting his weight. Your brother was a traitor. He stated out plainly. He was foolish and naive in his pursuit of power to avenge his clan. And you are to blame. Itachi stared weakly at the blonde for several moments before responding. I protected him. Danzo would have had me kill every Uchiha. I pleaded for his safety. Then you are as foolish as Sasuke. Naruto shook his head. Not every Uchiha was evil in Konoha. Annoying, yes. Only a fraction of the clan was actually planning to revolt. You knew this. Itachi coughed up more blood as he answered the blonde. The Uchiha were corrupted in nature. I was given orders and I followed them. To keep Konoha safe, I would do anything. Naruto stared at the man as he tried to understand the man's reasoning. He couldn't though. The only reason the blonde was truly loyal to Konoha was because of Tsunade. Was this similar to Itachi and the leaf? His eyes narrowed at the thought. Itachi would do anything to keep Konoha safe. The blonde would move mountains if Tsunade asked him to do so. Perhaps he and Itachi were more alike than he originally thought. You wouldn't question orders. I'm a shinobi. What the village asks, I do. The village comes first. Naruto stared at the man before a wave of anger swept through him. He didn't understand why that statement angered, but he knew that it did. Then you die in vain. The Uchiha line ends today. Itachi closed his eyes as more blood dribbled down his chin. I am not the last Uchiha. There is one other. The male coughed out blood as Naruto paid attention to that information. He goes by the name of Tobi. It isn't his true name. A persona of his. He's the true leader of the Akatsuki. He pulls the strings. He is dangerous. Do not underestimate him. The elder Uchiha warned the younger prodigy. The Jinchuriki clicked his teeth in annoyance. He will fall like you and your brother. Every shinobi has a weakness. The elder Uchiha managed a small smirk at that statement. You speak as if you don't have a glaring weakness yourself. The Akatsuki has eyes everywhere. They know how close Tsunade is to you. A vicious glare pulled on the blonde's features after Itachi's statement. A blanket of absolute malice and evil slammed into the surrounding area. Itachi felt his heart stop for a single moment as his eyes widened at the sheer anger radiating off the boy. Even Toba's presence wasn't as vile as this. If I have to crush the necks of every single one of you, then I will. No one will hurt what is mine. You all will eventually die. The slaughter begins with you. The crimson eyes of the Kyuubi bore into Itachi's very soul after the boy's statement. A blade of pure wind chakra formed in Naruto's hand. With a single slash, Itachi's head was severed from his body. Blood spurted from the decapitation and the head rolled several feet. The blonde snarled before retrieving the head. He picked it up before plucking the eyes out of the skull and sealing them away. A dead Uchiha was a good Uchiha. He spotted the ring on the mont's hand before he plucked it off. He knew that the rings bore some sort of meaning to the group. Kisame has one and Itachi had one. It wasn't a coincidence. The Jinchuriki pocketed the ring before performing a fire jutsu to burn the corpse of Itachi. He stood still for several minutes as he sensed his sensei beginning to make his way towards him. Kisame must have fled after Itachi's was annoying that he would be unable to kill two members today, but there was plenty of time. They were after Jinchurikis, they'd have to come to him eventually. And when they did, he would crush them. Jiraiya stared at the charred corpse that was once Itachi. His expression was grim as he contemplated their next course of action. He and Naruto had already warned the other villages about the threat that the Akatsuki posed. It seemed that the group was now finally making their move. The sage was incredibly proud of Naruto removing one of their stronger pieces. Itachi was not a shinobi to take lightly. The fact his student basically crushed him was a testament to the blonde's power. Yes, Itachi may have been crippled slightly, but Jiraiya was positive that would Itachi had been at 100% that Naruto would still come out on top. It's the teacher's job to believe in their students. Naruto was like his father in that regard. Boy, would it have been a spectacle to see those two fight each other. The older man gave a low sigh and sat up from his crouched position. We should go. Tsunade will want to hear about this. It'll take a couple of hours at max speed. The white-haired sage dusted his hands off as he turned to his student. The blonde was staring off into the distance with his arms crossed. It would have been normal enough, but the boy was gazing in the exact direction that Kisame had retreated to. I want to give chase. But I'm also aware that should I follow, I'm no doubt to run into several members at once. I am confident in my strength, but I'm not foolish. That annoyance will live to see another day. Naruto placed his hands into his pockets and closed his eyes before making his way to Jiraiya. There's not much we can do. Considering you took out Itachi. I'm sure they won't send anyone but their leader after you. Itachi was stronger than the members we have intel on. Jiraiya crossed his arms and surveyed the damage between the two prodigies. He shook his head at the carnage left behind. It was absurd. Kakazu the Five Hearts monster, Sasori of the Red Sand, Hidan the immortal zombie, Kisame the tailless Biju, and Deidara the mad bomber. The blonde named off boredly. They wouldn't prove much of a fight. Altogether, that's a different story. Jiraiya glanced at the boy before he began to head off in the direction of Konoha. He didn't bother looking behind him to see if Naruto was following. Yeah, well, most people can't take on the typical A-rank shinobi. You're talking lightly about 5S rank shinobi capable of fighting armies. Naruto didn't respond for several moments as he kept pace with his teacher. I am a one-man army who can take on an entire army. They are of little importance. I am more interested in the leaders of the Akatsuki. Jiraiya glanced back at Naruto in minor shock. Leaders? What do you mean, leaders? His student opened his eyes and gazed at his teacher. Itachi told me that there is another man who pulls the strings behind the scenes. An Uchiha, the one who possibly infiltrated Konoha all those years and caused the events that lead to the Kyuubi being sealed into me. It was only inference at this point. The blonde wasn't even sure if his hunch was correct. I can't imagine how strong the leader has to be in order to reign in 6S rank shinobi as rowdy as that bunch. It was worrying that there was yet another layer to this puzzle. As if they didn't already have enough shit on their plate. Don't try to. It's pointless. You worrying will make you doubt your ability. Have you gotten weak in your old age? Jiraiya could actually detect some semblance of humor in the boy's tone. He was learning. Great. Wait. He was just insulted. Naruto was aware of the emotions that shifted on his teacher's face but ignored him. It was true after all. Worrying about the future changed nothing. He just had to get stronger. Jiraiya increased his speed and pushed his body full throttle. The blonde immediately following suit. Naruto did wish to see Tsunade. It had been a long time coming. Almost 3 years. A small, nearly unnoticeable smile etched itself on his face. Break. A beautiful woman with blonde hair sat in a wide-open office. She possessed a unique green diamond on the center of her forehead. Her eyes were closed, hiding her honey-brown irides as she rested her chin on her right hand. In her left she was holding a pen that was being flicked through each individual finger. Tsunade sat at her desk in utter boredom. Being the Hokage was probably the worst thing she'd ever done in her shinobi career. And she had quite literally torn people apart with her bare hands. Right down the middle, 2 whole pieces of a human. Kami she hated being the leader. But it wasn't without its perks. A smirk marred her beautiful face as she reminisced on some of the things she had done during her tenure as the 5th Hokage. From ripping Danzo's heart out to single-handedly stopping a revolt due to how she chose to rule Konoha. Ah, such beautiful misery. 36 shinobi had been put to the sword that day. All because they disliked how she ran the village. It mattered little to the busty beauty. You either listened or you perished. Her sensei had been far too lenient with his authority. The state of affairs in this village had been appalling. The woman had immediately saw fit to abolish the civilian council. A shinobi village had no need for one. The woman shook her head in annoyance at that. She couldn't wrap her head around why her uncle thought giving power to non-shinobis was a good idea. Tobirama could be an absolute idiot at times. They had protested but she of course stamped them down ASAP. Tsunade cared not for what they wanted. They'd listen or die. There was no third option. After all, she only took the hat because of Naruto. Keeping him safe was her #1 priority. Many had found that ideal to be asinine and had vocalized those thoughts. Stating that, the village came first over personal feelings. A snort of amusement escaped her at the thought. They could suck her non-existent. She'd be damned if the son of Minato suffered a second longer in this cesspool of a village. Her grandfather must be rolling in his grave. He and Madara had built this village on the ideals of peace and acceptance, and yet those very same people spat in the boy's face. Abusing him and treating him less than dirt. Ostracized for carrying the Kyuubi and all the suffering that came with it. Had Minato and Kushina been alive, surely this village would have been purged for such insolence. Hiruzen did an awful job caring for the boy. She loved her sensei, but the respect she once had for the man was gone. Allowing all this negativity to fester after Minato's sacrifice. The room shook as her anger made its presence known. He had allowed Orochimaru to escape, allowed Danzo to run amok and ploy behind his back, let Naruto suffer at the hands of this village and subsequently wiped the Uchihas from history. How? It was unfathomable to the blonde. Experimentations on the masses to the cultivation of Sharingans. Unacceptable. The desk she sat at exploded into 1,000 pieces of wood. The tiny splinters spreading across the room in disarray. Great. Now I'm pissed. Tsunade's eyes opened, revealing the beautiful light brown pupils that rested. Only now they were alight with anger. The woman stood up and began to walk to the window of the room, the hidden Anbu all cringing at the anger that wafted in the room. She flicked the windows open, which expectantly blew them off their hinges, practically eviscerating the wood and glass that held it together. The woman's arms crossed beneath her impressive bust as she stared out at the village that brought her nothing but anger and sorrow. If it wasn't for that whiskered little brat, she wouldn't have all this stress. She shook her head at the thought. No. No. She was just frustrated. It wasn't his fault. Naruto was similar to a kitten. Well, at least in her opinion. Harmless until backed into a corner. He was more like a dog, a pit bull then. Kittens seemed to sell him short. The boy was dangerous after all. A shinobi, that is. He excelled in all things related to the shinobi arts. People skills and communication, etc. Not so much. But she had been making progress with him before he left on that training trip. The blonde's tense shoulders seemed to relax as gentle breezes swept through her hair. She missed the boy a lot. This job was bearable when was around. Tsunade hadn't even saw fit to drink her alcohol that much anymore. What was the point if there wasn't someone to admonish her about the dangers it had on her health? Sure, Shizune would do it, but it was always more amusing when Naruto did so. A smile formed on her face as she pictured the boy's little pout. He was so cute, worrying about her health and such. He most likely knew that she drank just to get a reaction out of him. Or did he? That's a thought. Maybe she should ease up on the teasing then. The woman continued to remain still even as the door to the office opened and two familiar faces walked in. The two individuals stood at the splintered remains of her desk unperturbed, waiting patiently for her to acknowledge them. Guess you can teach old dogs new tricks. Tsunade would make them wait though. The two elderly individuals were silent as they awaited for their Hokage to address them. They knew that an angry Tsunade was a lethal one. You didn't poke someone who could crush concrete with her fingers and snap chakra metal with her pinky. It was stupidity at its finest. Kaharu and Homura were content with waiting. What do you two want? Tsunade remained in her position as the two elders straightened. There is a matter that the Shinobi Council is unable to solve. They request your presence, Hokage-sama. Kaharu informed her superior. This was always the nerve-wracking part. The blonde was quick to anger and it didn't take much to set the woman off. Tsunade gave an irritated sigh following the woman's statement. What exactly is the problem that the clan leaders of Konoha and other esteemed shinobi that I've hand-selected can't solve on their own? The woman's foot began to tap impatiently against the carpet. Homura decided to respond this time. It is because they are physically incapable of solving the matter. All subjects regarding foreign delegates are to be solved by the Hokage. The most we can do is provide input, Tsunade-sama. The elder man responded in a respectful tone. The blonde woman gave another irritated sigh before rolling her neck. Who is the delegate? So help me Kami if this is a waste of my damn time. The two elders winced at the unspoken threat. They were just the messengers. A woman from Sunagaker. She has a scroll with the Casecage's seal. That is all we were told. The woman said it was for your eyes only. Kaharu bowed her head to Tsunade after responding. The blonde furrowed her eyebrows before giving a click of her teeth. Let's get this over with. I want to retire for the day. The busty woman began to make her way to the council chambers with the two elders following behind. It took several moments to reach the double doors of the chamber. Tsunade pushed them open with her eyes closed. She took slow, measured steps as she made her way to the head chair that held the Hokage. She decided to stand still in front of the chair and crossed her arms beneath her bust. The individuals in the room had ceased their conversations when the woman entered. Suni opened her eyes as she gazed at each individual. All of the shinobi in the room sat straighter as her eyes swept over each person. Her expression was one of annoyance as she finally made the rotations. Every clan head was in attendance as well as those of who she hand-picked to be here. The Nara, Yamanaka, Akamichi, Aburame, Inazuka, and Hyuga clan heads sat next to one another. Other minor clans such as the Kurama and Hitaki were also in attendance. Tsunade gave a short sigh before focusing on Sume Inazuka. Sume, since I like you the most in this entire room, tell me what the hell is going on. I've heard the gist of the situation from the two fossils in the back. So tell me him. Her eyes bore into the feral woman's eyes who submitted quite quickly by ducking her head. Sume was happy that Tsunade at least liked her the most. So that was a plus. Of course Tsunade-sama. As you're already aware of, I hope so, a delegate from Suna has arrived. We of the Shinobi Council are unable to discuss and solve matters that involve foreign delegates. We have no jurisdiction on the subject. The woman trailed off lightly as Tsunade's eyes scrutinized her. The blonde woman eventually rolled her finger for her to continue on. To which Sume nodded her head at. Her name is Tamari. Chunin rank. Prominent wind user. But you may remember her mostly due to the fact that she was one of the foreign shinobi that aided in the Sasuke Uchiha retrieval mission that occurred 2.5 years ago. She is currently waiting to seek an audience with you Tsunade-sama. The feral woman bowed her head in obedience following her statement. The fifth Hokage pursed her lips before making a subtle motion with her pinky finger. Upon doing so, a woman in a cat-themed Anbu mask dropped directly beside Tsunade in a crouched position. Go get her. Now. The woman nodded and immediately disappeared to fulfill her task. A minute passed by before a sandy blonde-headed teen entered the chambers. Her ever-present battle fan was attached to her back as the entirety of the room gazed at her. She felt like a rabbit in front of a wolf den. Tamari frowned as she gazed at the occupants. She really wanted to clutch her trusty fan right about now, but she'd possibly be cut down. There was some big fish in this room. Kakashi Hitaki and Asuma Sarutobi being two of the few she recognized. Hey, you, come here. Tsunade motioned with her index and middle finger towards the Suna Kunoichi. The blonde didn't have all day. She wanted to drink and then take a nap. Tamari swallowed thickly before making her way to the busty Hokage. This woman was far more dangerous than everyone in this entire room combined. The Suna Kunoichi could still remember the absolute monstrous pressure the woman released upon finding out that half of the team was in critical condition and Naruto had not been found or shown up. It was the single most terrifying experience she'd ever been through. Which was saying a lot considering her younger brother was Gaara. The older woman held her hand out expectantly. Tamari fished the scroll out of her shirt before placing it in the palm of Tsunade's hand. The older blonde continued to stare at Tamari for several moments as the Suna Kunoichi wilted under the gaze. The fifth Hokage nodded before prying the scroll apart and reading through the text. The woman's expression became more and more annoyed before she abruptly crumbled the scroll in her hands. Tamari cringed at the angered look in the woman's eyes. How in the hell did she even grind the paper to dust like that? What the hell? The woman's fierce gaze found Tamari's and she withered at the look. My office. Now. Tamari gave a light yelp before sprinting out the room. The fifth Hokage rubbed her temples and gave an annoyed sigh. You're all free to go. All of the gathered shinobi just glanced to one another before wisely deciding to leave. Not one of them was going to even entertain the idea of asking what was in that scroll. She had grinded the paper to dust. with one hand. Do you not understand how insane that is? Not worth the trouble. Not in the slightest. Tsunade began to storm her way to the office. She kicked the door off its hinges, which blasted through the now fixed window that she destroyed several minutes earlier. Tamari jumped at the action as she stood on the broken remains of the previous desk, a new one also replacing the one Tsunade broke. Kami, this woman is insane. The busty Hokage stomped to her chair and sat down in a huff. After several seconds, the woman drew in a calming breath and went silent. Her previous ire disappearing instantly. Tamari swallowed audibly as she shifted slightly in place. She was dead. Dead. This is where her life would end. A horrendous stain of guts on the carpet of the Hokage's office. Truly a pity. A person silently made their way to the destroyed window of the office and sat in the open space. The male gave a curious blink and decided to just watch the scene. All the while the two blondes never noticing his appearance. The Anbu noticed him but made no move to inform their leader. The woman was irate. Not much else to say. Through gritted teeth Tsunade began to speak. Tamari-san. Please try to make me understand. I've no patience today. Speak. The woman's eyes were closed and Tamari straightened up. She flinched as the busty woman's chakra began to flare slightly. As you know, Hokage-sama, my younger brother Gaara was made the cage. But, the village has not truly accepted his reign as they still remember how he used to be. She frowned in frustration after her statement and looked down at the floor, unaware that Tsunade's eyes had opened and now glimmered with sympathy. The Council of Suna controls most of what happens. Gaara has tried all he can, but until he can garner the trust of the populace, he is essentially just a figurehead. It doesn't change the fact he is the strongest shinobi in our village. This wasn't his doing. He was vehemently against the idea, as am I. She trailed off after her statement and shifted uncomfortably in the office. Tsunade was quiet as she processed what the 19-year-old was telling her. She was aware that this wasn't the Ikibi Jinchuriki's doing. The boy was similar to Naruto in nature now. Quiet and usually emotionless. It's no wonder the two got along well. Her favorite brat had changed the boy for the better. And now look at him, leader of his village. And at such a young age as well. Impressive. The older blonde gave a low hum and rested her cheek on the fist of her right hand. Her eyes became half-lidded and she stared directly at Tamari, who shifted at the predatory gaze. So, Suna's little council believes that I'll just bend the knee to their demands. With such little compensation, Tamari shifted yet again at the woman's question. Well, this was getting dangerous. She loved her village with a furious passion even through the stupid decisions. She needed to mediate this before it got out of hand. If Tsunade wished to march her troops to Suna, there was little stopping her. Konoha could crush Suna with little to no effort. Naruto had already proven capable of beating Gaara. She wasn't sure if it was possible on her brother's turf, but the blonde must have only gotten stronger since then. I know that the conditions are not entirely favorable, but the village has little else we can truly offer. Surely there must be something I can do too. Tsunade's finger rested on Tamari's lips, silencing her. The sandy blonde's eyes widened exponentially at the action. She hadn't seen the woman even move from her seat. The Hokage was staring at her with a far more gentle expression on her beautiful face. You do not have to do anything. I don't look like it, but I've been around for a while. I know how this shit works. A marriage contract binding our villages together is absolutely out of the question. I already know exactly who it is that they are asking for. The woman's gentle expression shifted into something far more terrifying. Naruto is the single most important person in my life aside from Shizune. And while I have nothing against you personally, Naruto isn't some little shogi piece that I throw around haphazardly. You tell your little council that if they push the issue, I will come down there myself. Do I make myself clear? Tamari shakily nodded her head as the woman continued to glare directly at her. Stories of Tsunade's brutality on the field were known worldwide. Sunagakur as a whole stood no chance against the woman. It wasn't a secret that her village was the weakest of the big five. Tsunade's finger pulled away from Temari's lips before she patted the girl's cheek with an almost mother-like quality. Good. I'm glad we see eye to eye, Tamari-chan. Now, you're free to stay for the night before leaving. I'm sure you wish you get home rather quickly, yes? The busty woman gave the girl an amused smile afterwards. The gesture was incredibly annoying to the Suna Kunoichi, but she dare not voice it. Yes, Hokage-sama. The reply was stiff and her eyebrow began to twitch as the older blonde continued her cheek pats for several more moments. Tsunade finally let off her amusement and gave the girl a small nod before sitting at her desk again. Neko. Escort her out. If anyone slanders her or even tries touching her, bring them to me. The purple-haired Anbu captain appeared beside the woman and gave her leader a nod before gesturing for the girl to follow. Tsunade gave a low sigh and began to massage her temples. Stupid. This job sucks. Why did I take it? She began to grumble and throw curses to the gods at her misfortune. The figure in the window that had watched the entire scene finally began to move. The man crept his way through the room before placing his hands on the busty woman's shoulders. Tsunade's entire body tensed and her eyes shot open. Before she could smear the person who was able to sneak up on her, a familiar voice spoke. Because you wished to protect me. That is what you said after all. Tsunade's body relaxed under the gentle ministrations of Naruto's hands. She turned her head to make sure if what she was seeing was true. The woman's eyes raked up and down the boy's body. His hair was longer and more spikier. His face thinning up and his height had skyrocketed. Kami, he must be almost 2 heads taller than her now. He looked good in white. She thanked Jiraiya later for finally being able to convince him that black wasn't the only color a shinobi could wear. The busty woman relaxed in her chair and closed her eyes. When did you get here? Better yet, why? You're not due back for another 6 months. She trailed off with a sigh as his hands worked their magic. The Jinchuriki blinked as he massaged the tense and knotted muscles of his aunt. She was wound tight. The boy's eyes glanced at the mountain of paperwork that remained untouched. Seemed she still cared not for the village's proposals. Jiraiya-sensei has taught me all he could. I saw no reason to continue the journey. He began to dig his thumbs into her back as she gave a low moan. We ran into 2 members of the Akatsuki. He stated rather offhandedly. Tsunade immediately broke the massage and stood up from her chair as she inspected the boy's body like a worried mother. The boy didn't react as he let her check every major organ and artery of his body. Where was Jiraiya? Are you hurt? Did you sustain any injuries? Who were they? How many? Are you okay? The questions rapidly spewed from her mouth as she busied herself with checking the boy's abdomen and cheek. He was with me. I'm not hurt. I did not get injured. Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki. 2. I am content. The blonde answered each question that was asked of him. The busty beauty stopped her search after his statement and stared into his eyes. His head was tilted to the side like a curious puppy as he stared back at her. She finally managed to get a good look at her favorite shinobi. A gentle smile appeared on her face and she immediately pulled the boy into a hug. Both of her arms wrapped around his back and she lay her head on his chest. I'm glad you're okay. I worry about you. The boy's arms awkwardly hung at his sides before he slowly and hesitantly wrapped his arms around her. Tsunade's smile widened at the rather awkward hug he was giving her. The boy was still unused to gestures of affection, but he has definitely improved since that day almost 3 years ago. Several more seconds passed by before the boy finally relaxed in the position, his head coming to rest against hers and his shoulder muscles uncoiling. The boy said nothing as he stood in the embrace of his fellow blonde. He inhaled lightly through his nose as Tsunade's scent invaded his senses. His right hand that rested on her lower back began to wrap further around her. A warm feeling covering his entire body as he stood arm in arm with his aunt. It filled him with a unique emotion that made his heart beat faster. Naruto was unsure of what it was, but it felt right. I missed you, Auntie Tsunade. His voice came out small and hesitant, as if he was unsure of what he was saying. Tsunade's smile grew at the statement as she increased her grip on the boy. He was durable enough. A stronger hug wouldn't break him. Hopefully. The two blondes stood still in the center of the room for several moments longer than necessary. The Anbu in the room watching the entire ordeal silently. The three masked nin had their own assumptions regarding the relationship between their leader and the Jinchuriki, but they'd never speak it aloud. Only amongst themselves would the topic be brought up. At times, it seemed as if Tsunade cared a little too much for the boy. It bordered on obsessive at times. The boy had only been 14 at the time and never truly understood the mannerisms that people possessed. What Tsunade had been doing was out of the norm. She'd take hours out of her day just speaking to the boy about mundane topics. Asking opinions, thoughts, and anything that would spark something with emotion. Day after day she'd spoon her way through. And each day the lingering touches would last a second or two longer than they should have. The gentle brush of her hand on his as he listened to her stories. How her hand would rest on his shoulder and linger when they were out in the village. The woman's gaze searching for something that only she was able to see. Whatever it is that their cage could see had sparked, in their opinion, an unhealthy interest in the boy. Every day since the boy's departure she'd speak of him. Mostly to herself or with Shizune. The raven-haired woman would sit and listen each and every time. Never bothered by her master's topic of choice. It was, I killed Itachi. Naruto's eyes opened as Tsunade light LT pulled away in shock. She stared directly at him as her lips parted slightly. You killed him. She blinked several times as he nodded his head. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a scroll. His head is in here. As well as something else. She slowly took the scroll as she processed what had been said to her. It was just baffling. Sure, he had been pretty strong when he left on his trip, but being able to match and not only kill Itachi. How powerful did her favorite blonde get? What about Kisame? Judging by how his eyebrows furrowed and his lower lip twitched meant that the shark man had managed to escape. Doesn't matter. The next time I see him his sword will be in my right hand and his head will be in my left. The busty woman's eyebrows raised at how confident he was. It almost bordered on arrogant, but she knew that Naruto only spoke truths. If he was absolutely sure that he'd be able to kill the shark man, then she believed him. Doesn't mean she also wouldn't worry either. Tsunade's hands grazed his torso before coming to rest on his cheeks. She lightly caressed his whisker marks before speaking. How strong are you, Naruto? The Jinchuriki though was distracted as he stared into her eyes. It was rare to see such beautiful honey brown eyes in Fire Country. Most individuals possessed ebony or dark brown pupils. Her eyes truly were beauty. The boy blinked as Tsunade's fingers pulled on his cheeks, stretching them out slightly. The woman had a small pout as she stretched his cheeks. He gave a muffled, "What?" as Tsunade just continued to stare at him. Several moments passed as the woman gave another squeeze before letting go. This was going to be a long day. At least he was here now.